Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is David Singer. I am the National Director of Limmud North America, and it's a pleasure to have you all with us for our inaugural, first ever, but first of hopefully many more to come, Limmud Book Club. It's such an exciting honor to be able to host this event tonight with Michael David Lukas, and it's especially exciting to be able to partner with our good friends at the Jewish Book Council, whom we are extremely grateful of for their partnership, for their support, and it's really exciting to be able to bring this program to you tonight through our partnership with them. As you may know, Limmud North America is dedicated to animating and reimagining Jewish community, and we do that by bringing Jews together from across diverse backgrounds to connect with transformative learning and each other. And so it's in that light that we are excited to host tonight's program. I'm going to be introducing in 1 minute our moderator for the evening, Suzanne Swift. Suzanne is a board member of Limmud North America. She also works the Jewish Book Council, managing their Jewish Book Council, their Jewish Book Network, and has been instrumental in building the partnership and relationship between our two organizations. So we're extremely grateful to Suzanne, to the Jewish Book Council as a whole for your support. Just some ground rules so you know what's going on. We're all on a thing called Zoom. Obviously, I hope this finds each of you healthy and safe in your respective time zones and corners of the country and continent and globe. We have participants joining us from all over tonight. So thank you all. You're on Zoom, you're muted, which is why you can only hear me and shortly our moderator, Suzanne, and Michael himself. But we do hope to open our program up to questions later this evening. So the easiest way to get your voice heard, there are two options you have. One is there is a chat window. If you're not familiar with Zoom or not very familiar, on the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says chat. If you press it, it'll open a if you press it, it will open a window, and you can use that to ask questions. You can also press the raise hand button, which is in the participants screen. And when we come to question and answers, we'll call on people who are raising their hands so that they can ask questions. Now, this is our first book club, but it is not our last. So I'm excited to let you know that in addition to our other programs, we already have the date for our next book club set. We will be reading in the coming 2 months, or month and a half, excuse me, Promised Land by Martin Fletcher. And we look forward to discussing his book and his work with him on June 8th, 2020. That's at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Again, information is on our website. And then in addition to the next book club, of course, I hope you are aware, Limmud Festival is coming back on May 24th. Limmud Festival is a virtual festival of the most important, interesting, and inspiring Jewish ideas we can find. And we were blown away by the reception of our program last month and the ability to bring people together during these difficult times. I hope you'll join us on May 24th. Early bird tickets are still available. We'll be telling you a little bit more about the program at the end of tonight, so stay tuned. But without further ado, it's really just my honor to introduce to you the person who you're actually here to listen to tonight, Michael David Lukas, who has been a Fulbright Scholar in Turkey, a night shift proofreader in Tel Aviv, a student at the American University of Cairo, and a waiter at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference in Vermont. He's written many books. He has an incredible story to tell. I hope you all enjoyed reading this as much as did I. Really just a remarkable book. But I'll let Michael talk about himself. I will let Suzanne interview him. So without further ado, I'm going to turn our program over to our presenters this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, Suzanne Swift and Michael Lewis. Thank you all.
David, thank you so much. We're excited about this partnership at JBC and my personal involvement with Limmud North America. So when we had this opportunity to put this together, Michael's one of the first authors I thought about, because I read this book when he won the National Jewish Book Award in 2018, and then I got a chance to read it a second time, which was really exciting for me to be able to do that. Thank you, Michael, for committing to do this. Michael has been touring with the Jewish Book Council for the last couple of years, both in person and virtually, telling his story to JCCs and synagogues and all kinds of groups around the United States and Canada. So we're really excited to be able to do this with you today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thanks for...
My first question for you is an easy one, is because I don't know how many people have had a chance to read this fabulous book. So why don't you give us a short synopsis, tell us a little about the book, and then we'll go into some of the characters and some of the details.
So the book is about the Jews of Cairo, and it's about the long, more than 1,000-year-old history of this community. And it spans from the 11th century to the cusp of the 21st century. And basically the plot of the book revolves around 3 different characters who are drawn to and whose lives revolve around this one synagogue in Cairo, the Ben Ezra synagogue, and a set of documents that was discovered in the attic of the synagogue, the Cairo Geniza. And each of the 3 plot lines sort of follows one of these characters, or in one case, 2 of these characters, as they kind of come into contact with the community and the synagogue, and their lives are transformed by it. I actually had an interesting exchange with, I occasionally get emails from readers, and I got an email from this one reader who is Orthodox and lives outside New York, and he was sort of asking me questions about my own Jewish observance and orientation. And I said, well, you should read the book and you can find out, and, which is always my answer. He had a really interesting comment. He was sort of questioning, why did I have, there's 3 sections, an 11th century section, a 19th century section, and a 21st century section. And he was wondering, why did I even have the 19th century section, which is about these 2 Victorian twins who come to Cairo and basically discover or steal, or whatever you want to call it, the Cairo Geniza and bring it back to Cambridge University. And I thought it was so interesting that he asked that question, because to me, that part of the book is fundamental, but to him, that's not what the book was about. And so, yeah, that's just the long answer to your question, which is that, the book is about lots of different things to lots of different people.
You're not going to make this easy.
No, I'm not.
Can you talk a little about the book about the Watchmen? What is a temple watchman, and is it based on truth? Is it based on truth in this Egyptian story, in this Cairo story? When was the last watchman in Cairo, and what is the history about that?
So the sort of the main thrust of the book, and the part that this particular reader was, talking about, is in the book. There's this family, the Al-Raqab family, who is a Muslim family that has been watching over the synagogue from generation to generation for 1,000 years. And the watch is passed from father to son, and they have this very close but not uncomplicated relationship with the Jewish community. And so that is that's the sort of the through line that takes us through those 1,000 years. And so the Watchmen are these different Al-Raqab family members who watch over the synagogue in difficulty and in times of prosperity, but it also could refer to the contemporary character Joseph, who is an American Egyptian Jew, half Muslim, half Jew, who goes back to Cairo to sort of investigate his family history. And so some people think that the last watchman is his father, who sort of, is the last actual watchman of the synagogue. And some people think that it's Joseph, who, serves a sort of watcher role over the community and these documents.
So when you were investigating to do this, did you find history about other true watchmen and true?
Yes, thank you for following up. So as far as I can find, there was no actual Muslim watchman over this particular synagogue in Cairo. There were certainly Jewish watchmen, but there was no El Raqab family that watched over the synagogue from generation to generation. The idea behind that comes from a conversation that I had with a Bengali woman who I met on a plane when I was kind of in this moment of feeling stuck in writing the book. And in the process of talking to her, it came out that her distant cousins were Bengali Muslims who were watchmen of the synagogues, these two synagogues in Calcutta. And when she told me about this, it sort of opened up, a locked box in my mind, and I realized, oh gosh, this is what should serve as the backbone of this novel. And then in doing further research, I found out that there were actually watchmen in Libya and in, I think, maybe Tunisia, somewhere else in North Africa, and that there's a lot of Muslim watchmen now in Morocco who watch over Jewish graveyards and holy sites now that most of the Jews are gone. And I actually had the pleasure of meeting a really brilliant scholar at UCLA who's an anthropologist who studies these watchmen in Morocco and their sort of understanding of the Jews of Morocco now that most of them are not there anymore.
So what made you pick Cairo versus Morocco?
Well, I lived in Cairo, so it's one of these just happenstances. I was living in Cairo in the year 2000, and it was my first time living in the Arab world, my first time living in a mega city, and it was really I loved the experience. It was, if anyone has been there, it's this kind of amazingly beautiful and sublime, decrepit, overbearing, welcoming, beautiful, and kind of dirty, wonderful place. And so I just spent my time just kind of walking around the city, talking to people. It's the type of place where, or at least it was when I was there, where you can walk down the street and, being who I am, a sort of young man who looks like he's not from Egypt, people would just call me over and welcome me, to sit with them and have some of their lunch and have some tea, and then they would bring me to their homes. And I just said yes to, as much as I could physically possibly say yes to. But the disjuncture in my experience was, I didn't feel like I could fully bring my Jewish and, to a certain extent, American identity to these interactions. I didn't always feel like I could tell people I was Jewish, whether because of my own discomfort or, actual reality. We'll never know. But so that was sort of a difficult thing for me in the beginning months. And then one day I was on a walk and saw in the old part of Cairo called Old Cairo, also Coptic Cairo, and I saw this graveyard and kind of wandered in there and saw some Jewish names on the gravestones, and then noticed some Hebrew. And I kept wandering and eventually came to the synagogue that this graveyard was attached to. And I had not been to a synagogue in Cairo. I did not know that there were synagogues in Cairo. But, standing there and overhearing this tour guide talk about 1,000 years of Jewish life in the city, it really was a kind of moment of transformation for me, both in terms of, my own identity and also in terms of my understanding of this place, what it means to be an American Jew who's in this place. Even though I'm not an Egyptian Jew, I'm, Ashkenazi by, on all sides. But I felt a real connection to Cairo, and I felt, being able to merge that connection to Cairo with my Jewish identity somehow felt really profound to me. And I kind of became obsessed with the Egyptian Jewish community, read everything I could get my hands on. And, many years later, when the time came, I decided to write this book, and it had sort of been percolating in the back of my mind for about 10 years. And then I had this fortuitous interaction with the woman on the plane, and then I wrote it.
I had been to Cairo. Crossing a street in Cairo, you take your life in your hands. It's crazy there. I have never seen anything like that. It's just unbelievable, unbelievable country. I was totally fascinated.
Crossing the street, I mean, I had such a hard time with the crossing the street because it's such a big part of life. Like, you're constantly, every time you want to cross a street, you are literally taking your life into your hands. And I wanted so much to put that into the book, because I felt like that's like a fundamental part of what it means to be in Cairo. But I didn't feel like I could really express what it was like to someone who hadn't experienced it. And so I ended up, I must have spent, 100 hours trying to write this one page of like crossing the street. And I ended up taking it out in the end because it just didn't work. It just 100% didn't work.
We still talk about that. So I want to talk about a couple of things. One of the things I want to talk about is there's been a lot of information about Jews in Cairo coming out in the last few years. I mean, they've just now spent a lot of money renovating one of the synagogues in Cairo. And I have a friend whose father was a Jew that was told to leave Cairo. And there's such a nostalgia every time anybody talks about Cairo and being Jewish and having to be thrown out of Cairo and how much they miss it. How is that working with what you learned about it and what you've been working on and this whole nostalgia about Cairo and the Jews?
I mean, I can't say that I have nostalgia for it because I,
Right.
never lived there during that, heyday of the early 19th, mid 20th century, whatever, that sort of span. But yeah, I really do feel connected to that history. And, I think it's interesting in a sort of larger sense because so much of what we understand of Jewish history in this country reflects my own family experience. It's about Ashkenazis living in the shtetl, and it's about the Holocaust, which is my family experience. And living in the Middle East, because I've lived a few different places in the Middle East, and kind of investigating that history really helped to kind of open my eyes to, this larger swath of Jewish history that is just as, if not more, rich than that Ashkenazi history that we know so much about. And at the same time, I can really understand the sort of like feelings of what it means to be a refugee, although I've never been a refugee myself. Like, I talked a lot with my grandparents about what it's like to leave a place that you know. And so, yeah, there is a tremendous sense of loss because, you know, I think people felt connected. They lived there for 1,000 years. I mean, and which is 3 times as long as Jews have even been in the United States.
Right.
And so there's this long, rich history, and then suddenly it's severed. And it wasn't, you know, without warning, but from sort of perspective of that long history of the Jews of Cairo, it was, you know, it was quite sudden. And so, yeah, I've had a lot of Egyptian Jews read the book and respond really well to it. Folks who've lived there. I see there's some Shamarias on the Zoom, and
Mark,
you know,
raising his hand.
that I think is an Egyptian Jewish name, if I'm not mistaken. It's definitely in the book. And I've, you know, talked to some Moseris, another name that's like a sort of common Egyptian Jewish name. But yeah, I think that there isn't a tremendous amount of sadness and nostalgia. And, you know, it's reflected in Joel Bainan, who wrote the sort of most authoritative book on the Egyptian Jewish community, calls the book The Dispersion of the Egyptian Jews. And he knows, you know, what
Right.
the sort of connotations of that word, and you know, he uses it for other reasons as well. But I think that there is a sense that this is cohesive community that was dispersed.
So I want to talk about Agnes and Margaret. You touched on them a little bit, the sisters. I that to me was like a Raiders in the Lost Ark kind of story. I think that they could have their own part 2 book just on the 2 of them and their adventures. I could see these 2 women riding on camels in the desert. Can you talk about their influence on the book and why you put them in there? I know you touched on it a little bit, but
yeah. So they are real ladies who are just, you know, if you made them up, they would seem like kind of fantastical. They were these millionaire, devout Presbyterian Scottish ladies who lived in Cambridge, and at a time when women couldn't take classes at Cambridge University, were 2 of, you know, the foremost Semitic language scholars of their time. And they traveled around the Middle East, basically buying up and otherwise procuring documents related to, you know, the Bible, because they were interested in sort of like biblical scholarship. And so they play a really important role in, you know, helping Solomon Schechter, you know, the founder of the Jewish Theological Seminary and the guy who we named all those schools after, take these documents and bring them from Cairo to Cambridge, whatever you might think about that. And so as soon as I encountered them, I fell in love with them. They wrote a couple books on their own. There's a few biographies that are written about them. And I just really was taken by them and their story, and you know, the obstacles that they overcame, you know, because you know, there's certainly a lot of misogyny today, and Lord knows there was a lot, you know, 100 years ago. And they had a lot in their favor. They were British, they had a lot of money, but you know, they were up against a lot in what they did, and people didn't expect much from them, and they got a lot. And so I love them, and I'm glad that you love them. And yeah, if you want to read more, there's a great book called Sisters of Sinai that's mostly about a previous trip that they took to Cairo, where they discovered what's called the Sinai palimpsest.
cool. I definitely see a movie in that.
Yeah. If there's any, you know, Hollywood producers on here, The film options are available.
So I know people always hate when you ask this, but who's your favorite character? You went through 3 different time periods with all these different characters. Were the sisters your favorite? Who stands out the most in this book that you put together with all these wonderful people?
My daughter for the first time, who's 5, asked me who my favorite child was. And I obviously told her, you're both my favorites. And so, the same thing is true for a book. But I think that I am connected to them all in different ways. I love the sisters because of everything I said, and because they're so ornery. And, from a sort of technical writing perspective, I really liked writing that sort of dual point of view that hovers in between these 2 characters. And I love Ali, the teenage Muslim watchman in the 11th century, because he's so different than me, and because he's so kind of naive and earnest, and I think lovable. And I feel very connected to Joseph, the contemporary character, because while he is, unlike me, half Muslim and gay, he's a character that's very similar to me, and has a lot of the same experiences, and lived in Cairo at the same time I lived there. And so that was the hardest section for me to write, because it was like I had to disconnect the character from myself, and it took a while for me to sort of figure out that that's what I needed to do in order to really fully write him and to fully inhabit him, was to allow him to be himself and give him that space to do that.
How did you find him? I think it's such an interesting, he has lots of different things going on in his life. How did you, this part Jewish, part Muslim, gay, in a world that is homophobic, all these things. How did you find him to be your character?
He was kind of just there, who he was from the outset. I don't know. I'd always been kind of fascinated with the fact that Jews are matrilineally descended and Muslims are patrilineally descended, and you could kind of be both, according to Jewish and Islamic law. And then I was also interested, when I was living in Cairo, I had a few American friends who were gay, and, sort of talked to them about their experiences, and, not so much the homophobia they encountered, but just how, being gay is really a different thing in Egypt, and that, it's more, as Joseph says, it's less who you are, and it's more something that you do. So it's not an identity category in the same way, although it may be now, but it's less of an identity category, and it's more just something that you happen to do. And so I was really interested in that, and I was interested in he basically just came fully formed. And in earlier drafts, my wife has a PhD, and I was writing this book while she was writing her dissertation. And in earlier drafts, I was really focused on the sort of academic piece of it. And, it was all about Joseph writing his dissertation. And, after a while, I kind of realized, no one cares about that. I was just trying to work through my own, trauma that I experienced when she was writing her dissertation.
Did she finish?
She did finish, yes. She does. She's not in academia, but she does have a PhD.
Cool.
And I made her a shirt to prove it.
And you could call her doctor.
Yeah.
So one of the things on one of the pages, I think it was page 65, you wrote something that when you protect something, no matter what it is, it becomes your own. And I thought that was a really powerful statement. In what ways do you think that holds up in this whole book. I mean, I thought it was powerful throughout the book and why you came to that.
Yeah, I mean, I thought a lot about what it means to watch over something, and you know, whether it be you're watching over a synagogue, or you know, while I was writing the book, we adopted a dog, you know, and this dog meant nothing to us when we saw it on Pet Finder, aside from it's a cute dog that kind of looks like the size that we are looking for. But as soon as, you know, we took him into our car, he was ours, and you know, we were protecting him and defending him and loved him, and I was really interested in that transformation, when something sort of becomes your responsibility, when you're watching over it, how that changes your orientation to it. And you know, in a larger sense, the book is about what it means to live in a multi-ethnic, multicultural society, because that's what Cairo was, you know, for hundreds and hundreds of years. It still is, but less so. And what it means to be a minority in a multi-ethnic society, and what it means to have power, and the different type of power that people have. You know, the Jews of Cairo, this particular Jewish community, you know, is a second-class citizen in a lot of ways, legally, and you know, in terms of their place religiously in the society. But at the same time, you know, they have means and they have power over this young Muslim man, and you know, how does that power relationship play out, and how does that affect the way that we're interacting with each other? That's sort of the larger questions that I was interested in when I was writing that, and when I was, you know, writing the book in general.
Because I thought that played across the whole book of what you protect, and I think it's really important.
Yeah.
So talk about a little bit about, how did you decide the Ezra Scroll was a thing that they were going to look for and they were going to try and find, and why was there such an importance around it at that time? And
yeah, so the Ezra Scroll is not entirely made up, but it is partially, you know, I found a little reference to the Ezra Scroll in, I think it was a Gershom Scholem book, just like a little footnote of that. And you know, it said it was this perfect scroll that was written by the prophet Ezra. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, oh my gosh, because the synagogue is called Ibn Ezra. And I thought, whoa, what if this scroll somehow found its way to Cairo and you know, became part of the synagogue? And you know, so I connected a lot of dots myself. But there is in a you know, I think 17th or 18th century travelogue, there's a reference to the scroll of Ezra being found in some dark closet somewhere, and I quote that in the book. So it's not entirely fabricated, but I loved the idea, you know, someone who writes and who is striving towards some sort of perfection that's never achieved. I was really interested in the idea of a perfect book. And, you know, of course, the perfect book would be a religious book. It'd be the perfect Torah. It'd be the perfect Quran. It'd be the perfect, you know, Bible.
mm-hmm.
And what kind of powers does that perfect book have? And so, you know, after I thought of that, I just kind of like took it off and went running with it.
Fascinating. So also talk a little bit about a Geniza. Why was it so important when you were doing all the studying about, I was fascinated when I first started studying some medieval Judaism about, you know, finding these papers. And it's been in a couple of different books over the years about the importance of a Geniza.
I mean, partially it's just an amazing, you know, story of this community putting this, the story in short is that, you know, this synagogue, the members of the synagogue would put their pieces of paper that had the name God on it in the attic or in a storeroom of the synagogue, as opposed to most Geniza, which are buried in a graveyard. And because of the climate and whatever else, these papers were preserved. and basically kind of sat up in the attic storeroom of this synagogue for hundreds and hundreds of years until Agnes and Margaret and Solomon Schechter found it. That's kind of the quick and dirty version. But I loved the idea of the Geniza because it's not an archive. Peter Cole and Adina Hoffman have a book called Sacred Trash about the Geniza, and they call it an anti-archive. And because it's a collection of random pieces of paper that have maybe some sort of divinity attached to them. And I just love that idea. And I it also sort of rhymes with the idea of the multi-ethnic society, which is, all of these different voices from different places coming together and creating something larger than the sum of their parts.
So Michael, I have a couple other questions, but I see people are really anxious about asking some questions.
Yeah,
directly. So I'm going to let David facilitate this piece of it. And then we'll come back to the last few questions that I have for you. David?
Michael and Suzanne, thank you both so much. This has been a fascinating conversation and really helped to draw out and elucidate so much of what I enjoyed about the book. So thank you. If anyone has questions that they would like to ask, please use the raise hand functionality. It's in the participants window, and then I'll call on you.
And I see there's a couple, there's one or two in the question queue group chat too.
They have not been posted publicly. So if they've been
okay,
asked,
there was one that says, were Jews part of the bathhouse culture in Cairo, or were they excluded?
Oh gosh.
That was from Alan.
I don't know. You mean like the public baths?
Alan, are you there? Can you open up? That was the question. It says, were Jews part of the bathhouse culture of Cairo, or were they excluded?
I mean, I think that my understanding is in medieval cities, there's different public baths in different neighborhoods, and so you go to your neighborhood bath, and so I think that would kind of inherently provide an exclusionary mechanism. Like if you're just going to the bath in your neighborhood, you're not really mixing with people who are living in different neighborhoods than you. So I don't think they were excluded because they wouldn't have been able to wash themselves. It was such a fundamental part of daily life or weekly life.
Thank you. We have a question from Noreen, who I'm going to call on right now. Nope, Noreen, you muted yourself after I unmuted you. 1 second.
I'm unmuted.
There you go. We can hear you.
So I'm very excited to meet you because I'm taking a Melton class on the Cairo Geniza.
Oh.
It's a wonderful class, and someone in the class mentioned your book. So I read the book, and it was very exciting to read it along with the study of what's in the Geniza and the history of the Geniza, and it was just a fabulous companion to our course. And I'm going to tell everybody about it.
Please do.
Yeah. Thank you. It was a great, great read.
Thank you. Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Noreen. I'm calling on Mark Shamaria.
He's muted.
There we go. I didn't know that I'd get to ask the question out loud, but Michael, I'm so glad to meet you via Zoom. And I read the book when it was first published. I had a daughter who was visiting Cairo for her 40th birthday. And somehow she knows you, but I'm not sure what the connection is. And I read this book and I was so excited to see our family name associated with the character Shamaria the Pious. And I just want to know how you came to that and a little bit more insight from you.
Well, it's very nice to meet you. I like I said, I've met Moseris at readings, and I've met there's a couple other names that I use that I've met, but never Shamaria. So it's very nice to meet you. And The answer is going to be unsatisfying, because I think I just went through a list of, Egyptian Jewish names and chose one that I thought sounded good. But once I chose it, the family, the Shemari family is very important to the story. And I think it may have been there may have been some sort of scholar named Shemaria who I kind of used as a model for him. But the wonderful thing about writing a book about medieval Cairo that's set partially in medieval Cairo is you have this amazing resource, the SD Gottin's A Mediterranean Society is like this 6-volume book that's all based on the Geniza as source material, and it describes painstakingly, every aspect of life in Cairo at the time, and it's really phenomenal. And so I probably just was leafing through that book, like, look at the index is a whole book, it's this whole book that's this big, and I was probably just looking through that and being like, that sounds like a good name, that sounds good.
Does anybody else have a question?
We have time for one more. Well, y'all are very good at actually raising your hands.
Someone raising their hands on Peg.
Peg, I will unmute you. Yes.
So Mark is my brother, and the Shemarian name. I wanted to add a little more to that question, because our younger brother was a medieval Jewish scholar, an Orthodox rabbi who lived in Israel. He's since passed away, but he told me about a book that was, I only got it in the library at the UC Berkeley Library to loan. And it was a history of the Sephardic Jews throughout the world. And I saw the name Shemaria, but it was used as a first name in Egypt. And I was going to ask that same question, but what happened, and it's very possible, our grandfather, the Shemarias, a lot of them went to the island of Rhodes, which is not very far. It's only a 24-hour boat ride from Haifa. But I don't have much more to ask other than to say that it's very possible that those Jews that were in Egypt and other parts of the Middle East made their way out of it and into other parts of the Ottoman Empire. So thank you very much. It was a real pleasure to read it. It was an incredible delight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, I think that's true, that there was a lot of back and forth in that sort of Eastern Mediterranean world. But, during the period that I was writing about, there was a lot of migration to Cairo. One of the big conflicts was, between the Palestinians, which were the Jews from, Jerusalem and Tiberias and whatnot, and then the North Africans, which were the Jews from, Morocco and Tunisia. And those were the two synagogues, and they were warring with each other. I mean, anyways, and not to get too deep into it, in terms of the name, there were no real last names or first names. It was basically just, your name, you're the son of whoever, who's the son of whoever. And so Shemaria probably just transitioned to being a last name at some point. I see there's
Michael,
one other question.
We have a question from Helena, who's asking if the length of the novel was something you considered. Were there any parts of the stories that you would have liked to extend, or some stories that didn't make the final draft? She obviously loved it and would have kept reading it even if it was another 300 pages.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you, Helena. When I originally started writing the book, I conceived of it as really wanting to do justice to the Egyptian Jewish community by writing a book that would be 10 different plot lines or 10 different chapters, one for each century of Egyptian Jewish life. So I imagined it being, 800 pages or something like that. As I was writing the book, I sort of quickly realized that this is not something I want to write. It's going to take the rest of my life and probably isn't anything anyone wants to read. And so, I started sort of paring it down more and more as I went through the process, and eventually decided that I wanted to just stick with these three kind of what I saw core indispensable narratives. And yeah, it could have been longer, but took me a long time as it was. So I'm glad it's done.
Well, I want to ask one final question that I ask all my authors. It's actually all questions. You get to pick one of them, okay? The first one is, what's on your nightstand? And the second one is, what are you working on now? And you could either answer both of them quickly or pick one or the two, but those are the most important. I always want to hear that from the authors I work with.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to, before we finish, I just want to thank you, Suzanne and David, and I see Naomi's on the call, the executive director of JBC, and I saw some other JBC names that I know. Just thank you all, to you individually and to your organizations, for doing this and for having me. I really, really appreciate it. So on my nightstand, or what I'm reading right now, is a book by an author named N.K. Jemisin, who's a fantasy sci-fi author. And this book is called The Fifth Season. And it's really brilliant. She's the first author, so she wrote this trilogy called the Broken Earth Trilogy, that each of the books in the trilogy won the Hugo Award, which is like the highest honor in science fiction. And she's the first author that ever happened. And the reason that I'm reading this fantasy novel that's set in the future is that the book that I'm working on now is a retelling of the Book of Esther set in the future.
Wow.
So it sounds kind of crazy,
No.
but like if you think of, the Book of Esther is a story about, history. It's a story about cycles of violence, and it's a story about the diaspora, and a recently created diaspora, right? In the Book of Esther, there are only a few generations removed from the destruction of the temple, and I was really interested in the questions that are at the heart of the book, and decided for a number of reasons that I wanted to explore them in the future, because. And actually, I think one of the epigrams from the book is going to come from, or epigraphs of the book is going to come from this N.K. Jemisin book. And I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head, but it's, most of history is unwritten.
Wow.
Remember this. And, you can take that in two ways. You can take that as, there's these vast swaths of the past that we don't know about, like what it was like to be a woman, or someone without much power during most of history, or you can take it as thinking like what's going to happen in the future is unwritten, and so I've written so much about the past, I wanted to sort of like look at that other part of history, which is what happens in the future, and to explore the questions at the center of the Book of Esther, but kind of from a slightly different perspective.
Well, thank you, David. I'm turning the last bit to you. Thank you for letting me have the opportunity to interview Michael. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Michael. This has been a fascinating, super interesting conversation. I hope everyone has enjoyed it this much, or certainly as much as Naomi Firestone Teeter, who's actually using the applause button and showing us that I want to thank everyone for joining us, and make sure that you are aware of our upcoming programs so you can join us for more programs like this. Our next book club, again, is June 8th. We're going to be reading Promised Land, leading up to that, by Martin Fletcher, and then have the honor to speak with him that evening. You can get more information about that on our website, limmudna.org. But our next program coming up is May 24th, the next eFestival, and we're excited to debut a little video about that for you right here. So please stay tuned, and please, oops, we're gonna try that again. We're gonna share a little video with you now.
What I wanted to do today.
Here's my premise, my friends. Here's my thought.
No matter where we are, there's people whose voices and stories are being heard.
It is good to be alone physically in this moment for the sake of safety, but it's not good to be spiritually alone.
Screen out the distractions, or is my job actually to take the holistic story of each person into account? Or, by the way, do I need to blow up the whole system?
It's true every year, but it's especially true this year.
Manishtanah. I don't know that person. I wasn't there, and I didn't experience any of this. But I tell the story, right, from the perspective of the generation who left Egypt, and I tell the generation that didn't leave Egypt to have that perspective when they get into the land. Thank you. Thank you, y'all, for North America.
So thank you all. Thank you, Jewish Book Council. Thank you, Michael Lukas. It was fascinating. We really appreciated it. And stay tuned for more programs. We're excited to continue learning with you. Everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. Take care.